sort of part of my punishment to the government for what they've done is I'm going to start by singing, and I'm just going to hum "What a Difference a Day Makes." So, well. So, the government launches a thermonuclear attack on the opposition, and the bomb blows up on the launching pad. And I'm, of course, referring to the fact that the chair is going to adjourn, or suspend, probably, this discussion in 1 hour, a little less than 1 hour, and wherein the government was all bloody-minded that they were going to force us to actually capitulate at the end of the day. And here we are now, a day later, and the government is blinking. And in the next 50 minutes or so that I have, Chair, what I want to do is just take the time, because there will be a week before we come back, and I wouldn't be one to suggest that there are millions of Canadians hanging off this debate, but I would say that for people who are serious about studying the politics and the give and take and the thrust of what happens here on Parliament Hill, there's a lot of attention on this. And those that care about democratic reform and about electoral promises are watching very carefully. And that's both on the activist side, and there's a whole host of the academic world that pays attention to these things too. And so my intent is to, rather than my usual goal, which is to try to convey messaging by being at least partway entertaining, more of this next period, I just want to kind of lay out exactly how we got here, so those that want to write about this and comment on it over the next week at least have a factual basis of understanding of how it is we got here, because it's not straightforward like most of what we do in politics. It's not crystal clear, and rules around here are often arcane and complex, which is why, Chair, you have the clerk to advise you on the rules, as experienced as you are. And when I was a chair, too, we can't know all the rules. There's just too many permutations, and we have experts. Each of our caucuses, we have experts. We have Rob Sutherland, who's just a national treasure in terms of understanding the minutiae. So it's not easy at first glance, even if you've had some experience in politics, to understand where we are, how we got here, and sort of, who's the good guys and who's the bad guys here, which, is, of course, a subjective analysis at the best of times. So let's just casually walk through how this slow-motion train wreck happened. So during the last Constit week, at some point, I think midway or towards the end of that week, the government House Leader issued a discussion paper, the infamous discussion paper, that outlines a number of areas that the government would like this committee to discuss. I don't think you're supposed to do that anymore, but I'm old enough to get away with it. They want to have a discussion. Okay. In and of itself, not a huge headline news, because we really didn't know what it meant. There was no comment that came with it. Best of my knowledge, there was no contact with our House Leader or our Democratic Reform critic. It just magically appeared one day, and then Mr. Sims' magical land speed record response with his motion then followed, and he takes his bow, as he should. And that motion is a real straitjacket if there isn't an understanding going into that discussion that the only items for recommendation to change that would go in the report are those items that have all-party agreement. Because in the absence of that, it's not a discussion. This is just foreplay before the government just moves in with their majority and finishes things off. I mean, they'll bide the time, like let the opposition talk, but we get into that straitjacket with that magical June 2nd, where if we're not done by then, there was supposed to be all kinds of catastrophic consequences. Interesting how all of a sudden, out of that tight time frame, though, the government now can find a whole week where we don't need to meet. when we had 24/7 opportunity. We could have done a lot of work in that time. Interesting how the government's now decided, gee, we don't really want to have that focus over the next week. So again, discussion paper lands. Mr. Sims' motion lands. Most people are focusing on the budget that was coming on the upcoming Wednesday now passed. And then we go to our regular PROC meeting on Tuesday at 11 a.m. You convened us, Chair. We came into order, and we were in camera. We were continuing our good work, our all-partisan, cooperative, progressive work on the Chief Electoral Report, a huge mammoth report with major implications for our country and our future elections. We were doing good work. Arrived here Tuesday morning. The staff were there from the Chief Electoral Officer. Everybody was all ready to go. We had all our mountains of trees that were cut down in front of us, all ready to go. And the government, out of nowhere, I can't say much, but I can say what they did in camera, said they wanted to go public, which in and of itself is usually a good thing, but it was a little perplexing given that it came in the middle of us doing a process that historically and by all-party agreement we do in camera, and then all our motions and all our actions, of course, have to be done in public, but the actual deliberations, the give and take, the negotiations, they take place in camera. To give us the latitude to try to get to an agreement. And anybody who's ever negotiated collective agreements understands the one thing that is a certain kiss of death is to try to negotiate in the media. That at some point you've got to have, you know, a get smart cone of silence over it. And I keep dating myself, don't I, Chair? You can't avoid it. And so I will go this far, and if I get tagged, you know, I'll take the hit. But, I mean, the reason I do it, I think, will be clear. I mean, we asked for a reason why. Just why? And in this climate of goodwill and working together and cooperativeness and trying to be helpful to one another and working at a common goal, radio silence, no answer. That's not, okay. We're certainly never going to oppose going in public if there's a good reason why we should. But you'd normally, Chair, you would think when we come into a meeting like this, if I can say, Mr. Chan has been very good in the past as the usual lead of the government side to talk to me and Mr. Richards ahead of time to give us kind of a heads up as to, hey guys, here's what I'm thinking of doing and here's why, and just to let you know. And what that does, of course, is it settles down the suspicion, and then you enter into these things with some idea what the government's really got in mind, so that you don't do your usual, which is to go apoplectic to make sure you stop them from doing something when you have no idea what their game plan is. That's a default mechanism. We all do that. No explanation forthcoming. Okay, so we're going public. Mr. Sims' motion is now on the floor for debate. Mr. Reid, I had said earlier Mr. Richards, I do believe, and please someone correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's Mr. Reid's amendment that we're actually debating, correct? Yes. So Mr. Reid then placed his amendment, which was exactly the right thing to do at exactly the right time, which is, wait a minute, the first thing we need to decide here is what are the rules of engagement? And so his amendment to the motion was that we agree, basically, I won't read the legalese, but the essence of it is that we agree that we won't make any recommendations that go into the report unless there's all-party agreement for that recommendation. Okay. Suddenly it starts to become pretty clear that the government has no intention of supporting this amendment. So, That's when the first real spark of trouble showed itself. Up until then, it had been the report, the motion, but no comment, no context. We didn't really know what it meant. We didn't even know if it was coming up on Proctor. That's why I say it was a surprise thing. I won't use the word ambush, but it was certainly a surprise, unexpected, and not explained ahead of time. No niceties at all. The veteran of this committee, Mr. Reid, on behalf of the official opposition, tables a motion that says, okay, if we're going to get into this discussion, let's make sure that we all understand we're all in agreement. We get the indication the government is not going to do that. And so what that means, Chair, is strategically there's a, excuse me, there's a vote coming. And if we lose that vote, it has serious implications. In this case, what it means is the government would then retain the right, or rather take the right, to use their majority to ram through, in spite of any opposition that the united opposition benches might have, to things they want to do in their discussion paper. Now, just because the discussion paper was issued and there's things they want to do, that doesn't by its definition make all those things evil. But I think it's more than fair to say that if you take a close look at anybody who knows anything about parliamentary procedure, will tell you most of these things, well, almost, well, let's just call it, say, a round number, 100%, benefits the government. And so under the plan that the majority government alone could force those recommendations through, then meant that that final report would be called the report of the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, and the government could legitimately say, we are only carrying out the recommendations of our independent standing committee that took a good look at this, and here's their report. Now, the government keeps saying, well, you can attach your dissension reports underneath. Yeah, that's a nice little nicety, but when have you ever heard anybody say, and what we're doing as a government is consistent with exactly what was in the report? Oh, and by the way, to be fair-minded, I want to point out that both the opposition parties did put forward dissenting reports. That doesn't happen, and it doesn't have to. That's why it's so critically important that the report reflects all our opinion and not just the majority. So, trust me, the plot thickens here. This is the easy part. So, discussion paper, motion, meeting, surprise, amendment to do the right thing, government indicates that they're opposed to it. That means that what we have to do strategically is we have to make sure this doesn't get voted on, even though it was moved by the official opposition. Once you get an indication the government's going to oppose it, they have more votes than us. Simple math. So, the last thing that someone of Mr. Reid's experience is going to do is allow that vote to happen where we lose, knowing you're going to lose going into it, and thereby losing our opportunity to have a unanimous all-party report reflecting all our wishes rather than just the ham-fisted demands of the government running over our rights. That's the implication. So, that's fine. And that's when Mr. Reid made it clear that he was going to do exactly what you do in that case, and most of us, one time or another, have had to do it. And that is, you sort of advise colleagues, settle in for the rest of this meeting, because I intend to talk out the clock, because the last thing I'm going to do is let the debate collapse and have a vote come forward that I know I'm going to lose. So Mr. Reid does the thing that we all do in that situation, and he starts talking. And his goal was to talk from 11 till 1 o'clock, which was our regularly scheduled hours. And then under normal sort of skirmishes, I'll call them that, as opposed to the war we're in now, the skirmishes, what would happen under normal circumstances, Chair, is that at 1 o'clock, the scheduled time to rise, the committee would adjourn. We would all then go about our business as normal, come back at our next regularly scheduled meeting, which would be the following Thursday, again 11 to 1, and at 11 o'clock you would gavel us into order and then give the floor to Mr. Reid, who rightfully has the floor under our rules, in that you can't force someone to end debate until they're done. And under our rules, you just carry that right into the next meeting. And what's our order of business on this Thursday? Well, we're going to continue what we were talking about on Tuesday, and Mr. Reid has the floor. And that's exactly what Mr. Reid and the rest of us expected to happen. And then things got dirty. Now, I'm sure it's happened before. I've only seen it once before. I've only had it done to me once before, and you remember it. Because what happened is that at 1 o'clock, when Mr. Reid rightfully expected that he would conclude his comments and be ready the following Thursday to pick up where he left off and continue, and it would be that kind of, that's why I call it a skirmish. It would be a filibuster, but it would still be within the usual time frame of when that committee meets, and that committee just kind of happens to be seized up right now because they got this issue and they're dealing with it as they go along. But it doesn't become what this has become because of this one, and I'm going to call it a dirty trick, because it is a dirty trick, and that is an ambush. Because I had exactly the same thing done to me. And what happens is you find out that where we all thought if the meeting, and this comes to a shock to members over and over, it did to me. We all assume, because we have a document, and it's probably one here on the table somewhere, that called this meeting to order, and it would say that we were going to meet from like 10 to 11. And, well, I guess it wouldn't in this case, because here we are at parliamentary la land. It's Friday, but we're still on Tuesday. But anyway, the fact is that you would have a piece of paper that tells you what hours you're going to meet, and 99% of the time, that's when you rise. And you would expect that. And I think there was a member of the official opposition who said, Chair, I would point out that it's a couple of minutes after 1 o'clock. We should adjourn this meeting and this discussion and reconvene Thursday at our regular time. And the chair said, actually, no. We're going to continue. And points of order ensued, and we had a discussion with the clerk about what's going on here. It said the meeting's over at 1 o'clock. It's now a couple of minutes after 1 o'clock. The chair has an obligation to end this meeting. But see, that's the interesting thing about parliamentary rules. They're not always crystal clear. Because what's inferred at the 1 o'clock rise is that at least the majority agree with that. It in and of itself is not an ironclad law of parliamentary physics that the committee must end at its scheduled time. The committee ends when a majority says the committee ends. And given that we are masters of our own domain and masters of our own destiny, that right remains sovereign unless and until collectively we decide differently or we get overarching marching orders from the House. Other than that, we control our destiny. And so when you apply that, what it means is that if the chair knows that the majority government members are not going to vote for adjournment, that he has, in this case, really no alternative but to keep the meeting going. Now, if need be, he could stop things and force a showing that there is a majority that want to keep going. But when there's a majority built in, it's implied and understood, and that's the way that rule works. And it was done to me, and interestingly enough, on a very similar kind of matter under that good old C-23, the Unfair Elections Act. And I came in, you know, all raring to go. You know me, Chair. I came in, got my stuff, I got my speech, I'm ready to go. And I'm 2 hours, like Mr. Reid. I've got 2 hours to go, and then I've got a day in between where I can do my homework and get my next 2 hours of talking points so I can keep the floor and keep it going, because, as you know, Chair, we can't repeat our arguments, and any argument we make has to at least have some kind of tenuous relationship to the motion at hand. And that is a discretion that you reserve as the Chair as to whether or not something is germane to the point in front of us. And I had exactly the same thing. I had that 2 hours and exactly the same scenario. And the whole points of order, and what do you mean, and shock on my part, and I'm like, what the heck? And then suddenly I'm thrust into, I'm now filibustering 24/7, and I've got like 2 hours preparation. And that was deliberate. It was an ambush. Now, for some of us, and I won't go long on this to my Conservative colleagues, but, you know, some things leave permanent scars. My friend Harold is laughing, my good friend Harold. Now, you might expect that kind of thing from sort of a ham-fisted government that we had before. I'll leave it at that, Harold, okay? If you can take that one before. If you take that one, Harold, I'll cut it short. No. I don't want to go too far down that road because it takes the sting away from this government, and that's really where the play is. But it does need to be said that we are in this. When I used the word war, it wasn't on the discussion paper, and it wasn't on the motion, and it certainly wasn't on the amendment. It was the government, excuse me, it was the governing Liberals using that, excuse me, boy, I lose my voice, I'll starve. That was the government doing exactly what Harper did as a vicious, legitimate. I'm not saying it's, otherwise we would use points of order to stop it. So it's allowed, but that doesn't make it right. And it certainly doesn't mean it was fair play. And there was never any intent for fair play. The government hoped that they would catch me flat-footed. At the time, I was the only one that was keeping it going on the filibuster. So if I couldn't keep talking, that meant that the debate would collapse and the vote would have happened, and I would have completely lost any further input into how C-23 was going to be dealt with. And I won't say that I won, but we did get some concessions. But my point is that it is a sneak attack. It's an ambush. It's meant to catch members flat-footed by using an interpretation of the rules that is not done day to day. In fact, it's not even done usually year to year around here. It's once every parliament or so this kind of hijinks is carried out. And that is when this government decided that they were going to take this skirmish and they were going to make it a full-blown war, and I just called it for what it is. And that's what triggered us going 24/7. So it's really important for those who want to understand how we got here, that this is not about the opposition has gone apoplectic and all we've done is step forward and we've hijacked the House and hijacked the committee and that we're the ones that are forcing all this. Not the case.
Point of information. This is actually a perfect opportunity for me to raise something that I wanted to just raise in a point of information. Just for the information of committee members, there has been an e-petition put up about half a day ago, late yesterday. It was put up just before dinner time yesterday on this topic, and it might be something members would be interested to follow. Particularly the Liberal members, because they're, being expected to do the Prime Minister's dirty work for them, and I'm sure that they're getting a lot of flack about that. And it's not, the only person that's benefiting from this is the Prime Minister. He's the one that wants to make life easier for himself. And so I think there's something Liberal members might want to follow. It's e-petition 983, and I'll just note that it's been up for about half a day now, and it has about 5,000 signatures. I'm watching it, and it's growing by the minute here. Signatures from every single province and territory all across the country. And I'll just read, I won't read the preamble because that might take too much of Mr. Christopherson's time, but I will just read the prayer on the petition, just for the information of members. It says, "We, the undersigned citizens and residents of Canada, call upon the Government of Canada to adhere to long-standing parliamentary tradition and procedure and not force any changes to the standing orders of the House of Commons outlined in the above-mentioned discussion paper without the unanimous consent of all political parties currently represented in the House of Commons." And as I say, it's around 5,000 signatures in about half a day and growing by the minute. Something that I think members would want to be aware of and follow, because it's obvious that Canadians from all across this country are demanding that this government not do this without the consent of all political parties.
Thank you, Mr. Richards. Mr. Christopherson.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank Mr. Richards for that, because it does show that not only the list of folks that I mentioned, but there are a whole lot of other. In fact, a lot of the people that felt betrayed over the government's decision to back away from democratic reform are exactly the same demographic and part of the population that are very upset about what's being done here and how the government is trying to grab power, further power than what they are already legitimately entitled to. And that just doesn't sit well with Canadians. So again, that's why the politics of this thing is so crazy, Chair. I have not, you've heard me, I've been perplexed from the beginning as to, number one, why the government's doing this, and two, how on earth they think they're going to win. This is Canada. This is a government that ran on a whole platform of doing things different, of doing the opposite of this sort of thing. That they wouldn't do these kind of sandbagging the opposition members, using parliamentary trickery, ambushing people, keeping them in the dark. All of that was supposed to have been swept away in the last federal election while we had a new dawn of sunshine and light and transparency. And instead, we get political thuggery that in some ways surpasses what Harper did. That achievement, and then uniting the Conservatives and the Liberals around, or the NDP around any kind of an issue, would be the two grand accomplishments of this government. So, I want to come back again to why we're here and how we got here, and why, even though this is Friday, it's only Tuesday. It's because the meeting on Tuesday has still not ended. This is it. And the chair has been very careful not to suspend, or pardon me, not to adjourn, which would then require a reconstituting of the committee and all the procedures we go through. The chair just suspends the meeting when we do suspend, but technically this is still Tuesday. And the whole idea was that the government was going to force the opposition to die on this political hill. They did it the day before the budget, knowing that everyone was distracted by the budget, and they were. There was very little coverage of the use of this nuclear option by the government in the media, and for good reason. They were focusing on the budget. And so that's why the government brought this in. It's no different than when they announce bad news things. They do it on a Friday afternoon, and it starts to get reported in the weekend when everybody has shifted their mind. Many people have shifted their mind to their personal life and their weekend activities, and don't really tune back into the serious formal part of the world until Monday morning when they have to. And this was the same sort of thing. And what they thought was that we would be too frightened of the public. All this talking is having its effect. Sorry, I apologize. Thank you. Okay, so all that had the effect of hope. They were hoping that we wouldn't have enough material and that we would be afraid of a public backlash that we were being obstructionists. And that's why their messaging all along has been, oh, Mr. Sims and others and the House Leader all we just want a discussion. We just want to improve things. This is about modernizing. We have a mandate to modernize. That's all that's going on here. And yet, what they wanted was for us to cave so that we would quickly get to a vote, come back again. Then that would force us to have that vote on the motion that we will only make decisions by all-party agreement, and it would lose. That was their game plan, Chair. This crowd that wants everybody to believe that they're so different and that sunny ways and we were going to transparency and accountability and we were all going to sing Kumbaya and we were going to pass laws together and we would only do things, all that, all just talk. They came in here as ham-fisted and bloody-minded as Harper was on his most determined day and used his same nuclear option. Poor Mr. Reid was just like me, practically apoplectic at now suddenly, unexpectedly, like really that's how we pass laws, by tricking and scamming one another? Suddenly what Mr. Reid prepared for, and he did an excellent job. You go back and read that. That was a solid piece of 2 hours of discussion on that motion. And he did his homework, and he came and he did his job, and he had every right to believe at the end of that discussion at 1 o'clock we would adjourn, and he would go off and do the other things he does. And in the interim, before he took the floor again on Thursday, he would do his homework again and make sure that he had another 2 hours of very relevant, germane discussion on the motion that's on the floor. That's what he had every right to expect was going to happen, and instead he got ambushed. Now tell me how sunny ways and ambush go together. I'm from Hamilton. I understand ambush. I understand getting along together. I understand transparency in sunny ways. This is not it. And let me just say parenthetically, Chair, if you notice, most of us in the opposition benches, even when we get in full dungeon, have been very careful not to in any way try to personalize and put ownership of this on the members of the committee, including you, Chair. Because no matter what niceties we have about this is Mr. Sims' motion, and Chair, you're being 100% independent and only thinking of the interest of the... As much as we all know that's our narrative, we also know why it is that the standing orders spell out certain committees have to be chaired by opposition members. So let me just say that the fact, and I'm not going any further on this, Chair, because that's why I'm saying it. We live in this kind of suspended belief animation of what's real and what isn't. And you're in this awkward position where you are a member of the team. You were put there by the government. Mr. Preston was no different. He did the best he could to be as fair-minded and as independent as possible. But at the end of the day, he's appointed there by the government. And, you know, when it was time to do what needed to be done, Mr. Preston did what needed to be done, as did every other chair beforehand. And the difference between a good one and a bad one is almost how much relish and delight do they take in running over the rights of the opposition. And chairs that are deep in character and true parliamentarians actually will push back their own government behind the scenes and say, that's not right, I'm not comfortable doing it. And that kind of thing will ensue. So I'm not going to go down that road, Chair. I mean, you heard what I said the other day, and we both knew that it was all very nice and very, you know, would fit nicely on a pedestal or on a plaque. But the real world is that you're there as a government appointee. Well, we voted for you, but we all understand. So when you said, I'm going to do this to do it once so I can move off, but I need to address it because I did deal with it the other day. So when you made the decision last evening that we weren't going to sit next week, I'm just going to say that I understand you made that decision. We'll leave that there, but it's also what the government wanted, and if anybody wants to refute that, I'm prepared to have that debate also. But the fact is, that's what the government decided, and therefore, why I opened up with my wonderful singing voice on what a difference a day makes is the government has blinked. They thought that worst case scenario, if the budget ruse didn't provide enough cover to slip and slam this through underneath the radar, that at the very least they could hold our feet to the fire and make us go 24/7 over the weekend. And why could they see them winning that one? Well, it just happens. Purely coincidental, I'm sure. Total serendipity. that the Liberals are all going to be here this weekend because they're having a caucus retreat. And my good friend Harold Albrecht knows very well how much easier it is to get volunteers to sit in on a committee when you don't have to schlep it halfway across the continent to do so, especially when you'd much prefer to be in your riding with your constituents, because during these times we don't get a lot of time there, so you value it. So we would be struggling in the opposition benches to find volunteers to sit in a committee meeting that for the most part nobody's going to pay any attention to, and give up time with their family and their constituents, whereas the government has, what's your majority, like 180 members? They only need, 4 or 5? Easy peasy. So if the budget didn't give them the cover, that was very clever in the short term. It wasn't very good long term, I got to tell you. In the short term, I understand it. So if the cover of the budget didn't do it, they'd get us on the weekend. And the second that we can't put up a speaker and the debate ends, that's when the chair can legitimately say the debate has now closed. We will have the vote. The government will use their majority to carry it, and we lose the right to have an equal say in what the rules are in the House of Commons. But what happened along the way is that this was so outrageous, so egregious, so unfair, dare I say, so un-Canadian, that even the Conservatives and the NDP found easy common cause in fighting this evilness. And I use that generically, not biblically. And actually, it's been quite enjoyable. I got to tell you, the Libs, we've now created some networks that regardless of how long we go forward on this, next time we need to come together, it's going to be a lot easier. We'll be able to do it a lot quicker. We had a great experience. And the fun we had doing the budget thing, bringing the attention here, well, there was a small group of us from both caucuses that were meeting through the day. A lot of respect, sharing of resources, staff working together. I never would have thought it's possible that the Conservatives and the NDP could work that closely together in a respectful way in common cause. But I want to thank the government of the day because you did that, and you should feel proud because that's not easy. That's not easy. Good sunny ways in terms of this side. So from there, we were easily able to say, okay, you know what? We're in this together, because if the official opposition loses the right to have an equal say, obviously we do too. So we have common cause. So we quickly got together and said, okay, let's make sure between the two caucuses that we've got the weekend covered, because we know the Libs can do it easily, and over the last 24 hours and 36 hours, we've been working together to coordinate a roster of members that would be here so that we could staff this committee for the entire 24/7 all next week, so that the government could sit there and listen to the response to their abuse of our rules, wall to wall to wall all week. I got to tell you, notwithstanding I want to go home and see my family and I want to be in my riding, I was kind of relishing the idea of that kind of a pitch. Because, you know what, in my gut, I knew the government can't. How can you win this? How? They can't. You know what? Given what's at stake and given what the government has done, and remember, they caused this war. Normally, we wouldn't be having this discussion until the Tuesday we get back, and it would be the regular scheduled time. We're only into this crisis 24/7 because the government wouldn't adjourn the darn committee meeting at the time it was supposed to adjourn, because that was part of their ambush. And then, last night, the government message, I'll put it that way, the government message was, oh, we're not going to meet next week at all. Now, I don't know what happened to make June the 2nd no longer the end of the earth or the end of the world. I guess maybe they delayed it for weather, I don't know. But it certainly puts the lie to the argument that this needs to be done. Chop, chop, chop. They just sold off a whole week of discussion. Because when we come back on a week Monday, we're going to come back at 10 o'clock, Chair, or 11 on that Monday? Noon. And at noon, what will happen is, this will be sure to push the audiences away. I get the floor again. And that's the one I've really been working towards. I've been waiting for a chance to really settle in. I got to do a couple of 2-3 hour speeches, but that was just to warm up my throat. I'm really looking forward to that one, because that one I can settle in. I've had all week to get ready. I'm looking forward to that. And I hope we're going 24/7 then, because, then we can do the marathon thing, and it'll be great. I'm so looking forward to it. But I have a funny feeling something will happen between now and then, because if they don't want that to happen today, why would they want it to happen a week from now? I mean, what a schmozzle. You guys have just played this so poorly, so badly, and done so much damage to your brand. And all you've done so far is to confirm all of that. And I had started to say earlier, Chair, and I do want to, because my time is starting to expire, but I do want to make sure that I do get it on the record that, we're all students of interpreting words and language, but also body language. And it's been pretty clear from the outset, with maybe one exception along the way. This is my opinion. If government members want to point of personal privilege, feel free. But I got to tell you, my personal opinion is there's not a whole lot of pride of ownership over on the government benches for what's going on here. I don't see anybody jumping in front of the camera saying, I'm the one that thought of that strategy to ambush Reid. That was me. I did that. And my buddies here, they're going to support me while we crush that opposition. No, they're pretty sheepish, and for the most part, they've been doing what they're doing now, and I would do the same thing, and I used to be in government, and I did do the same thing, and that is I kept my head down and I read things. And if I had to look around, I did it very carefully, and if I had to move, I made sure the focus was somewhere else, and I just really didn't want to be there. And I get the impression there are some government members that feel that way. I won't say any names, I won't go any further, but that was another thing. I mean, a lot of the people that are on this committee we've worked with in camera and publicly, and we've had some fights, but we've done a lot of good work together, and there's a camaraderie here, and there's a lot of respect here, and I know the kind of people that are on the opposition benches. One of them is a fellow Hamiltonian. And I know that the kind of campaign they ran on, I know what the message was, and I know for certain, at least the Liberals in Hamilton, there wasn't a one of them that was running on a platform, elect us and we'll ambush the opposition better than Stephen Harper. That was not the approach. And so while the geniuses that are dictating the strategy from up on high, the members here on the ground knew that this is not going to fly. It's not going to fly because they thought if I was on the opposition benches, I'd be going out of my mind too. And that's why, what do you do when something like that's going down? You just kind of keep your head down. Anybody's in this room, just take a look at the government members, and that's pretty much what they're doing right now. Just kind of, everything is more important than whatever's going on. And they're just thrilled that we're not meeting next week. I can tell you, there's no happier bunch in all of Canada land than government members who are on proc, who realize they don't have to sit there and take this well-justified abuse for another 7 days straight. Because, again, sometimes the rules work in our favor. As much as they're thrilled to see the end of a loudmouth like me and see my time finally come to a conclusion, all I have to do is put my hand back up, get back on the list, and we still can't have that vote until I'm finished talking for the second or 22nd time, and the same for Mr. Reid and Mr. Richards and Mr. Albrecht if he wants to join in too. So the government's got themselves, they got no one to blame but themselves. Like, what a mess. Now, somehow, and what they've done, Chair, and I think I've got maybe 5 minutes left because you wanted a couple of minutes to say some concluding remarks, correct? Very good, Chair. So give me a nod when you're looking to me. Yeah, okay. We know that the government does not want to be sitting here day after day after day, and what the government has done now is they've blinked, they realized that their declaration of war didn't work because they're not the ones that or rather the opposition are not the ones that blinked, it's the government. And they knew that we were getting stronger. And now that the budget's over, more and more pundits and analysts and people are starting to turn their mind to what's going on. And I haven't seen a positive write-up on the government's actions yet. I haven't seen, I'm sure they're out there, and some may start it now that I've said it, but I haven't seen a whole lot of articles saying that we are being obstructionist here and that we in the opposition are the problem. The ones that are starting to turn their mind to this and look at it and understand in a serious way what's going on, understand that this is a fight that the government set up, that the government picked, that they were hoping to trummel the rights and run roughshod over the opposition benches, and all they did was unify the oppositions in opposition to such unfair, undemocratic actions, and we were getting stronger by the day, and we still get stronger. The government knows they have to fold. The blink next week was the first indication, and now they got 7 days to figure out how the hell to get out of this mess. And then they still got the problem they started with is they would like to make some changes to the House. I'm sure they'd like to get a few advantages, but some of it may actually be goodwill. But now the thing is such a mess that look where they are. This is what happens when you say you're going to be one way and you act another. How many times have we said to the Liberals, you're so good at running on the left and governing on the right? And democratic reform is the poster child for that scenario. This government talked up a democratic reform argument that was as good as anything the NDP or the Greens could come up with, and the proof of that is the number of seats that you got in the election. But actions like this, on how we pass laws, are so opposite to what every member of the Liberal caucus said during the campaign and what their Prime Minister has said. So I don't know where the I don't know where the government goes now, but they need a stand down. And Mr. Sims, Mr. Richards and I think you'll have tried night and day, literally in the middle of the night, having side meetings with you. We've been the ones giving suggestions to you to give to the government about how we can get out of this. We've done everything we can to be reasonable to get out of this quagmire because there is some good work we'd like to get to. It just got a whole lot tougher for the government to get out of this. Because if you think that you can do this to us and then just decide you're going to fold, sorry, we didn't mean to upset you. We got a little crazy there. Sorry, we'll go back to our sunny ways. No, this does damage. It does damage to your brand. It does damage to this relationship. And the one chance you've got to salvage is how you decide to create your exit ramp and your exit strategy out of this boondoggle. So, Mr. Sims, there's probably, I'm winding up, Chair, there's probably a little bit of goodwill left. But I got to tell you, the string's running out fast. We're running out of runway here, to mix my metaphors. And your government has been so vicious in this process that it's getting harder and harder to find an amicable way down. And I can only urge the government to reconsider how they're approaching this, because if the government thinks that they're going to double down when we come back and that somehow we're going to get weaker in our opposition, then they've once again misread this situation. We get stronger by the day. Mr. Richards has read out the kind of support that's starting to come in across the country as people realize what this government's trying to do, to unilaterally, on a power grab, change the way laws are made in our parliament. That's what's at stake. That's what's going on. And the rights of the minority and all of these things are at stake. And so, Chair, I will conclude by only hoping the government, when they create their exit strategy, because I can't believe you're going to double down on this. You can't be that politically tone deaf as to say, okay, well, the reason that didn't work was we weren't tough enough, we weren't nasty enough, we weren't vicious enough, we weren't tricky enough. Hopefully that's not the attitude. What we need is a whole different attitude and an approach that takes us back to where we were as quickly as possible from this viciousness and back to getting and working together as we were. And we were going to on Tuesday. Again, I end by saying the government started this fight. But let me tell you, the opposition, united, will end it. The only question is when and how much more damage to the government brand in the process. Chair, I thank you for the opportunity to speak. I look forward to being back here again a week Monday at noon to continue our review of the government's current ways.